I just spent 20 minutes setting up all the books that I read this year that I own physically, and you can't even see 2/3 of them, and quite frankly, that's bull. Before I get started, I'm going to be talking stats today, but I wanted to show that I'm drinking, gonna focus, Tongting Fireside Oolong from Key 2 Teas. And I oversteeped it because I was rearranging my bookshelf. But it's not bad. I'm not a big oolong fan, so it's not like the best in the world, but it's not bad. Today I'm going to be talking through some of my reading stats from 2021. Hoping this won't be as long and in-depth as last year's was. I kind of forced myself to stop making graphs because if they're not saying anything, what's the point? So to just start out with some basic stats, this year I finished a total of 128 books. I started 143, so that makes out 15 DNFs, I think, if the math is right. And of the ones that I started, I own 38 of them after Christmas, so like some of those were gifts and the last like month of the year, but it's not as high of a number as I would like. I really should be reading more of the books that I own, but I'm not really buying that many books either. It's a lot of just borrowing books from the library, so I don't feel too bad about it. Anyway. So Storygraph, according to Storygraph, I finished 45,395 pages. My spreadsheet says that I read 49,305. That difference of about 4,000 pages comes from probably about halfway through 2021, Storygraph started tracking format of books. And I think if you select audiobook, it doesn't track the pages for that because you're listening instead of reading physically, and I kind of see that. So I think that's where that 4,000 page disparity comes from, because a lot of what I read is audiobooks, and that's going to wreck my page goal for 2021 or 2022. Gosh, it's already happening. Some other information. I read books. It took me about 9.8 days per book to finish a book, which isn't bad. 10 days is a pretty good number. And I read about an average of 135 pages a day. So that's not quite like every day I read 135, because I don't read every day, and some days I read more, some days I read less, but that is the average if you divide the total pages by number of days in the year. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of these stats. I'm going to start off with just some of the Storygraph graphs, start circling in mine, and we'll get through it, whatever. Let's just jump in. So the first one here is the Storygraph graph of the moods. I'm not really gonna say much on this other than I really thought sad books should be higher on this than it is. I feel like a lot of books I read are sad or emotional. Emotional is pretty high still, but adventurous is the main one, which kind of surprises me, but I think a lot of things that are just exciting get labeled as adventurous, so I don't know how accurate that is, but mostly I read a variety here, so we're gonna move on from that one pretty quickly. Pacing, this is also kind of all over the place, mostly medium, followed by fast, followed by slow, but it's still pretty good spread. I like to read a variety of things, but you'll kind of see throughout all of these graphs. Next is gonna be our page number. Here, similar split, the highest selection here is the less than 300 pages at 44%. I got really into novellas last year, and I really want to continue that. I liked picking up just a new novella on the weekend and reading it all in 2 days. It was just a lot of fun for me. It keeps my reading kind of fluid, especially when I was in the middle of reading a lot of big epic fantasies like Stormlight Archive and Lifeship Traders, so like it was nice to kind of take those to break up the big ones. Then it's the 300 to 499 range at 38%, and the smallest is that larger than 500 pages. I think this probably makes sense. More bigger books I can read fewer of, obviously. Here is my own graph of this. This just kind of breaks it down into smaller sections, 100-page sections instead of those big ones, and you see kind of a similar trend. Big concentration is that 100 to 500 pages is where most of the books I read come in, and the highest spike there is 300 to 400 pages is where the highest is. And that's, makes sense. My average page count for books was 362 pages per book, which is, I think, probably what I prefer. I don't mind a longer book if it's gonna justify that length, but for the most part, I really like my books to be around that like 300 to 400 page range. Next we got story graphs genres. If you want to look, pause, skim through this, I'm not going to talk about it that much. It's no surprise to me that fantasy is highest and then queer stuff is next highest. I'm going to dive a little more into the genres later when I look at some of my stats for ratings, but that is what Storygraph says I read. I'm really fascinated by that. One business and one health book that I read. And one self-help. Oh, I guess Relentless counts as self-help. Anyway, here's the age range. So this is my own graph here. I mostly read adult, a little bit of young adult, a little bit of very little middle grade, very little new adult. I kind of wanted to try middle grade more this year, but it just kind of didn't happen. The middle grade I read, I enjoyed for the most part. But for the most part, I stick with adult. Some of this might be stuff that wouldn't necessarily be qualified as adults, but if Storygraph didn't mark it as specifically young adults, I didn't really look at it too deeply unless it was something that sits in that new adult category, which I think I only had like 2 books on, and I really should start using that category more for those books that are really geared towards like college age. All right, and then this is Storygraph added this one that I really like, which is the most read authors that you read, but it's kind of super uninteresting to me just because obviously authors that I read series from are the authors I read the most of, you know. I have R.F. Kuang and Joe Abercrombie and Robin Hobb, who I read a trilogy from each, you know, Tamora Pierce, Nydia Okorafor, and N.K. Jemisin, which are all kind of in that same vein of I read a series or I read a series and one other book from. Same with Martha Wells, Becky Chambers. All of these are just authors I read a series from. It's not like these are authors I'm reading a lot of different books from. Here is probably my favorite graph ever that Storygraph does, which is comparing your pages and books per month. I'm not even going to show you my books per month graph because it doesn't make sense because Storygraph already does this for me and it looks great. But you can see there kind of curved. February was a bad month, but February is short, so I always kind of expect that. And then I really just hit a wall in October, and so dive bomb November, December, didn't read a lot. I'm not really sure why the page count is so high for December, because I looked at the books that I read in December, and none of them are particularly long, but I think maybe it was, I was going through and marking final DNFs for a bunch of books that I read, and I decided not to finish, and I'm wondering if maybe that's what did that. March, I didn't look to see what I was reading for March because I'm really interested. There's a really big jump there between number of books and page count. Maybe that was Sanderson, and maybe Poppy War might have been in that too. I always start January pretty strong, but here are the date published. I really do want to read more classics, and I say that every year, and then I don't end up reading a lot of classics. I don't know why, but I think I'm not going to make that a huge goal for 2022. I have other plans for 2022, but I do want to work on that because it's a lot of 2010s, 2020 releases, and I'm not getting that older stuff. And it's not like I'm not reading backlist. It's just what I happen to pick up. Part of that is it's the hype. It's what my friends are reading right now, so I'm like really excited about it to be able to talk with them. This one is Race of Authors. So I'm not going to dive too deeply in this. I had a goal this year. I wanted to read at least 1/3 authors that weren't white, and I managed to accomplish that. Now that I realize is a super small goal. Definitely not as high as it should be, but I'm going to kind of slowly work towards it. I think the key to goals like that is to make them achievable, because if I fail at them, I just give up. So like making it something achievable and then pushing myself a little further every year. So here I did it. White authors accounted for 62%, and the rest there was another 38%. I do want to keep working on this. I do want to make sure I diversify even within that wedge. Hispanic, Latinx authors were really low, so I want to see about trying to bump that up a little bit going into next year. Indigenous authors, surprisingly high, so I'm gonna want to do that. My goal next year is to be at least 2/5 authors of color, and then I'm gonna keep going from there and keep working on diversifying that. Here are ratings. So ratings here, Storygraph does quarter ratings, but I have a system, and the system I do gives me actually hundredths of ratings. So convert that for StoryGraph. So you can see there on the bottom what my StoryGraph ratings are and that kind of curve. We get that spike around 4.5, 4.25 is really where it bumps up. But otherwise it's kind of just a normal curve with a skew to the left, which makes sense. One would hope I was enjoying most of the books I read. The average rating on StoryGraph with these quarter points was 3.97, so very high. I'd like to keep it around there. I do a lot of things where I read books out of my comfort zone or intentionally read books I don't really think I'm gonna like. So I think this is always gonna be less than it could be, but I'm happy with that as an average rating. Now the graph on the top is mine based on the ratings that I actually give. And I grouped it similarly to what the StoryGraph one would be, but like shifted. You can see the bins there for that. And you get a very similar graph. I mean, things shifted a little bit just because of where stuff would have ended up at the 25 quarter ratings. And the average here for my numbers, my actual numbers I gave things was a 3.9. So it's very similar, which tells me that I do a pretty good job of evenly distributing things when I put them on StoryGraph. If anything, I kind of skew a little high, which is fine because especially for something like 5 stars, I'm a little more loose on moving things up to 5 stars. Now I'm gonna look a little deeper into the ratings I give and try to see if there are any sort of trends in those ratings that I give. Just a spoiler alert, there really isn't. So the first one here is my scatter plots. I spent a lot of time talking about these last year. I'm not gonna waste time doing it. I'm just trying to see if there's any sort of trend in the books that I read getting higher ratings, and there isn't. So the top one there is page count. So do I enjoy shorter or longer books more? No trend, no significance there. Next was the days read. So how do I start to like a book less if it takes me longer to read? There's no trend there. I do feel in the moment like I'm liking a book less, but when I finish it, like statistically, I give it similar ratings. It doesn't affect the rating. And the last one is publishing date. I don't rate things higher if they're newer or older or anything like that. Some of this can be with it's harder. I don't read a large spread. All of these things are kind of fairly concentrated. I did take out outliers, like the 3 or 4 books I read that were pre-1970, or the 3 to 4 books I read that took me 100 days to read. I took those out to kind of focus it a little bit more, but for the most part, it's just so spread out that it's hard to even find a trend. And continuing that, the next one I did, I looked at book cover this year. I just think it's kind of fun to look at all of the book covers, to look at just the different colors of book covers, and see if there's anything there. Now, I will say book cover colors are kind of subjective. A lot of them are multicolor and it's kind of hard to see. So generally I go with whatever the primary color is or whatever color it makes me think. The Diviner's purple, pretty easy. Darker Shade of Magic, white. I know there's red and black on here, but this is a white cover. Then you get ones like Snow White Blood Red. What color is this? I listed this one as brown. I think I might have done that because the naked hardcover is brown. There's also, when I read stuff on Libby or audiobook, what I go with, it's usually whatever the picture is. There's also ones that, I generally go with whatever the edition is. So for the Live Ship Traders series, I went with these covers. So this is a blue because that's the primary color there. All of this to say, this is super subjective. And a different person might totally put these books in a different category. That said, going through all of these real quick, I read 6 books that I classified as pink, 7 red, 3 orange, 4 yellow, 14 green, 23 blue, 10 purple, 19 black, 14 white, 8 gray, 13 brown. Brown is way higher than I expected it to be. It's my favorite color, and every time I put in a book being brown, I get really excited for it, but it's still pretty low. And if you can look at the error bars there, you're gonna see that none of these are actually significantly higher than the others. which is a little bit lame. Like, I was kind of hoping for something there, although it makes sense that there isn't, because there isn't any sort of like impetus for book color to affect my reading of it. But if we were to pretend for a second that this actually matters, you would find that the yellow covers are the ones that I rated the highest. So yellow is an average of 4.42, orange 4.31, black 4.13, green 4.11, white 4.06, red 3.94, blue 3.92, gray 3.86, purple 3.83, brown 3.62, and pink covers 3.59. But like I said, not really any significance there. And in that same exact vein, we have genres. So I narrowed my genres down to books that like I read a significant number of. Make of that what you will. This is also the number of books here is going to be like a lot higher than the actual number because most books have multiple genres. So quickly going through those, I read, before I get into that, so to go through these, I'm actually going to give percentages to these. These are the percentage out of the fiction books that I read. So I don't have nonfiction included here because nonfiction, I don't rate nonfiction unless it's like outrageously bad, like Relentless, or really good, like Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the School Cafeteria, or sometimes if there's something narrative to it, like Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars. That one I gave like kind of a rating as if it were fiction because it was so fictionalized. Anyway, you get the idea. So I'm giving these percentages, but the total percentage, it comes out to 130% because, like I said, genres, books have multiple genres. So contemporary, 6 books or 5%. Classic, also 6 or 5%. Literary fiction, 6 books or 5%. Historical fiction, 4 books or 3%. Romance, 10 books or 8%. Mystery thrillers, 9 books or 7%, horror 13 books or 11%, science fiction 30 books or 25%, and fantasy 73 books or 60%. I like feel when I'm reading that I read diversely, and then I do this at the end of the year and I'm like, that's a lot of fantasy. It's fine. Quoting these in order, this is also no significant difference between these, but if we just want to list out the averages, horror was at the highest with 4.08 out of 5, science fiction 4.05, fantasy 4.03, so that speculative section, real high up. Romance 3.95, historical fiction 3.85, classic 3.79, mystery thriller 3.67, contemporary 3.63, and literary fiction 3.56. What I think is interesting here, and I'm just gonna mention it because I don't wanna like dive into it too heavily, the average rating here is lower. And that says to me that multi-genre books I rate lower than single genre books, because if we just count each book once, the average is higher, not like massively higher, but the average rating is higher when I only count each book once. But when I count each book for each genre the rating goes down, which is wild to me because I really thought multi-genre books were like my favorites. Things like Harrow the Ninth and Gideon the Ninth that are super genre bending are some of my favorite books. But also some of my least favorite books are genre bending. The Mistborn Era 2, which is fantasy western, or that's really the big one. Maybe it's just that to blame. Regardless, I just think that's interesting. We are, at this point, at the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be posting my favorites book video thing very shortly, so hope you will check that one out too, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.